just when you think the Biden administration couldn't come up with any worse policy, what do you know? They do. They actually never fail in this one department to constantly do things that they shouldn't, not if they actually care about the American economy. This latest one, you are not going to believe. It's no wonder that 25% of Americans say they are working longer now because of inflation. With policies and politicians like this, well, how do we ever get ahead? Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Trish Regan Show. It's good to have you here. A quick reminder, please make sure you subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit that little alert button so you know whenever I'm here for you every day. Well, 5 days a week anyway. And I decided to take it out of the studio today. If you're watching this on video on YouTube or on Rumble or on Facebook, guess what? I decided to take it to the family room. So just a change of scenery. So kind of a different vibe. But anyway, always glad to have you here. A reminder that portions of today's program are brought to you by Legacy Precious Metals. There's never been a better time to invest in precious metals than right now. I'm telling you, with all this inflation. Gold, in fact, going up again today, nearing $1,900 an ounce, ending the day up 1.25%, 1,871. So take a look at gold. And when you do, think about a gold-backed IRA. Call my friends over at Legacy Precious Metals, legacypminvestments.com. I'm going to talk a little bit more about gold a little bit later in the show. But first, I want to get to one of the things that's driving all this inflation, and that's oil prices. Crude oil ending the day up 2% at $117 and change. What have I said? I've said 130 by the height of the summer driving season. So I'm still on the lookout for that. I think it could be coming July 4th. And this is despite the news that we got today out of OPEC. You see, the Biden administration has been working really hard trying to get Saudi Arabia, who kind of like runs the show right over at OPEC, to pump more oil, drill more oil, get it out of the ground and onto the open market. And Saudi Arabia, in part because they aren't tremendous fans of this administration, well, they've been pretty reluctant to do that. So there's been a lot of pleading and a lot of diplomats going back and forth, and we've sent people over and we're like, hey, we really need this oil. So come on, Saudi Arabia, go for it. So now Saudi Arabia apparently has said, okay, we've been persuaded. They're willing now to up their oil production. So by 600 and some odd thousand barrels a day, they're going to put into the open market. So you'd say, all right, well, that's good, right? That's actually going to lower the price of oil. And yet here we are with the price of oil up 2% on the day this whole thing is announced. I'm telling you that the oil markets are on fire, and they're going to continue running higher because of some pretty basic stuff. We lack a commitment to energy that's drilled here in the United States. I realize there's a big commitment to green energy, and I'm all for that. Let's go at it, but let's not ignore the other energy sources that we have here in America right here under our noses. Keystone Pipeline, for goodness sakes, had we had that, boy, it sure would have come in handy right about now, would it not have? There's tons of things that we could do, that we should do in terms of drilling here in the U.S. and throughout the entire Western Hemisphere without having to go all the way to the Middle East. But it gets worse. It gets worse because remember how the deal was that we weren't going to actually buy Russian oil, right? We were sanctioning Russia, and then we put a ton of pressure on the Europeans to also sanction Russia. And they finally came out this week and said, we're not going to buy oil from Russia. Well, here's kind of an interesting little tidbit for you. And this may be why investors don't believe that 600 and some odd thousand barrels from OPEC Plus, as it's known, is going to make a difference. And that's in part because guess who's part of OPEC Plus? Russia. Russia is part of this entire deal. So when OPEC Plus, as it's known, says, guess what, we're going to boost our oil output because Joe Biden's been begging them to, well, that means Russia is part of that deal too. which is crazy, right? I mean, there are rumors, and I have sources close to the State Department that tell me there's a possibility Russia gets kicked out of this thing. But I wouldn't be so sure. And my sources aren't so sure. They say that's probably wishful thinking, because Russia has its diplomats too, and they've been going back and forth to Saudi Arabia as well. And they're part of that, right, consortium of countries that are drilling oil and selling it into the open market. So my concern is that we've gone through everything that we've gone through with Ukraine. We've lost so many lives. It's devastating when you consider what has happened there. And yet we might actually be in a position of inadvertently helping Russia to get more money from its oil. Did you ever think about that? I mean, it's so frustrating to see this, especially, I think, when we know that we have the capability to do so much here, right? And that's what we should be looking for. How can we be independent? Why do we want to depend on these countries overseas? I mean, that doesn't make any sense, really, from just a national security standpoint. We ought to be independent. And politically speaking, I mean, look, Joe Biden, you'd be a heck of a lot better off finding sources of oil and green energy right here in the United States of America, as opposed to having to plead with other nations in other parts of the world to pump more oil so that Americans are not feeling so much from this inflation. And by the way, Americans are. Look, I said we'd get double-digit inflation by this time. Sure enough, we do. On wholesale prices, these are the producer prices, what producers pay for goods. That's being transferred, of course, onto the consumer. You've seen 8.3%. Everybody's like, woohoo, it's down from 8.5%. I'm sorry, guys. It's still upwards of 8%. Wages are not growing that fast. And now you have Jamie Dimon, smart guy, CEO of JP Morgan, saying, brace yourself, we're in for an economic hurricane. Hurricane was his word choice. I'm going to get into that in just a second, but I do want to point out that you've got the dollar under a little bit of pressure. Not a tremendous amount of pressure, but at 94.48, that's actually the Wall Street Journal dollar index. And we saw the euro gain a little bit, teeny bit of ground there in today's trading. $1.07 right now. Still a good time to go to Europe. It's kind of on sale, right? Down from the 115 range. Anyway, the important thing to watch here is oil. Crude oil at 117.54 cents. You got gold, silver, copper, all trading higher. But this oil thing is a problem. It really is. And what it's telling you is that there's going to be more and more and more inflation. Granted, the Fed is trying to do what it can do. You've heard my frustration on that. Treasury Secretary Yellen, by the way, this week coming out and finally saying, yeah, well, we got it wrong. We got it wrong. It turns out it's not transitory. Anyway, you got oil moving higher. That's not going to change in light of what's going on internationally, in light of our lack of commitment to American energy that's being made abundantly clear over and over and over again. That will result increasingly in higher oil prices. So even though the Fed's out there trying to do what it can do, 50 basis points at a time, woo, I mean, that's a lot. It's not going to really change the situation for oil. And as I've said, I expect gas prices in some parts of the country to be upwards of $9 a gallon by the 4th of July. That's very much in the cards. So with inflation not going away, you got to think about how you're going to protect yourself. One of the best ways to do that, as you've heard me say over and over again, is through gold. Something like a gold-backed IRA. You've got to protect your dollars. We learned, of course, today the news that 25% of Americans say they're going to still keep working. They wanted to retire, but they can't because of inflation. You don't want to be in that position. You want to make sure that you have investments that keep up with inflation. Nobody talks about that. I mean, why not have funds, investment funds, that actually are designed to outpace inflation? Why not have that be the primary goal? Plus, hopefully make a little bit more than the S&P 500. Well, one of the ways you can do this is via this vehicle, gold or a gold-backed IRA. So take a look at it. Call my friends over at Legacy Precious Metals. Wonderful, wonderful group there. They will help you out. Again, Legacy Precious Metals, their number is right here, 1-866-589-0560. Again, that's 1-866-589-0560. Anyway, I'm just amazed by all of this, because what a group of complete naive politicos, right? I mean, there is a real world out there where people actually have to pay their bills and take care of their families and put gas in their cars and food on the table. And nobody wanted to think about this before deciding against Keystone. I mean, think about even what's going on overseas, right, with Ukraine. We knew that one was coming. Our intel was phenomenal on that. We were prepared to take that project on, and we did. But knowing all that, like, is one hand not talking to the other? I mean, wouldn't somebody say, hey, you know, we're going to see a whole lot of oil come off the market soon, so maybe we should actually be a little more pro-U.S. energy? I mean, that would just make sense, right? But then again, here we are today, and we may not see all that Russian energy come off soon. They may tell us it's off the market, but do not forget, unless the Saudis and the rest of them decide to kick Russia out of OPEC, they're part of that deal. So they're pumping oil too. I'm sorry, but this is really, really messed up. For goodness sakes, do the right thing. Be energy independent. Make sure you're taking care of your own people. I mean, heck, I've even said, go down to Venezuela, for goodness sakes. It would sure beat taking Russian oil. I mean, I know that Maduro is not necessarily the most popular person in the world, but look at who the Biden administration is willing to entertain. Here's the deal. He's not going to get reelected with oil prices and gas prices where they are. In fact, I don't think Democrats can win with oil prices and gas prices where they are. So do the smart, sensible thing. Encourage U.S. investment in energy. I mean, I'm just blown away. I'm blown away by the stupidity of all this. I'm blown away by the fact that the Federal Reserve printed all that money when he got into office, that he spent $1.9 trillion, right, for more stimulus, that he sent out more COVID checks, and now he wants more. So you saw the news, I imagine, on Corinthian colleges, all the loans are going to be forgiven. It's about a $6 billion, amount. So not a ton. But I have a feeling that this is just the beginning. In other words, this is all an attempt. How does it play in Peoria? How does the media treat this? How do people that get their loans forgiven treat this? And if it goes well, hey, what do you know? Maybe we'll actually do one big giant package and forgive all the student debt out there before, of course, November. I mean, that would be obviously a huge mistake. It's a socialist-style policy that wouldn't work, I would argue. What would really help, really, is if the government would get out of the education business, which they're so actively involved in. And they've been, really, for years. I mean, going all the way back, really, to the sort of 50s and 60s environment where, I get it. They wanted to make sure that everybody could have access to a great education, and I'm a big believer in that. But, there got to be some limits here. When you're willing to give out blank checks to 18-year-old kids, it's like, I've used this analogy before, it's like saying, hey, you know what? You can go buy any house you want. Go for it. And here's the government money. And maybe you pay it back. Hey, maybe you don't in this new environment. Certainly, it sounds like you really may not have to. Well, what do you think it's going to do to housing prices? It would drive them through the roof. And that's what's happened with education prices. Meanwhile, you got this woke society that convinces everyone you have to have that little diploma from Timbuktu that costs you a darn fortune, or you're not going to get a job. You're not even going to get an interview. I mean, that's kind of messed up, right? Because I am a big believer that, people can often educate themselves. And by the way, not everybody has to have a degree in women's studies or philosophy or economics. A lot of people may be far better off learning to have a trade. I mean, great example. A guy just sold his house for a fortune nearby me, was a plumber. He had a great plumbing company all over New England. Smart businessman. It's ridiculous how our society has put so much pressure on families to take second mortgages out on their homes, to sacrifice their own retirements so kids can go and have a great party for 4 years. And I'm sorry, but that's in fact a lot of what it is. I don't even think that kids are necessarily mature enough at 18 years old to be going to college. I mean, I certainly wasn't. I started off at a conservatory. I took a couple years off because I was paying for it, by the way, myself. My parents actually, they were smart. In a way, I should thank them for it. It was kind of a miserable time when it happened, but they said, you're going to pay for this yourself. And I didn't have any money. It's actually one of the reasons why I was in the Miss America pageant. I won Miss New Hampshire because I won $60,000 worth of scholarship money and gifts and all this good stuff. And suddenly it hit me. I better actually get an education that will enable me to earn a living, to pay my bills, and by the way, pay back some of the student debt because I did have to take out loans when I went back to Columbia. And so, the pageant money only lasted so long. So the moral of the story just being that somehow kids need to know, and it's a very hard thing to know at 18 years old, that that money has to be paid back. And then it becomes more of a market decision, right? I was like, hey, I wanted to be in New York. I could have gone to NYU or I could have gone to Columbia. But you know what? I wanted to go to the place where, I felt like my dollars would be well spent. And so there's brand value, all that kind of thing in Columbia. I wound up going there. And I was fortunate and I was lucky to get in, but I was a heck of a hard worker and I had some good grades and all that good stuff. Anyway, the entire point of what I'm trying to say is we should not be on the hook for everybody else's education when, by the way, not everybody needs that slip of paper. And if they do, they ought to know what they're getting into, not some 18-year-old kid who wants to go to the school with the most parties. The American taxpayer should not be on the hook for that. I actually think it will be politically very, very damaging to Joe Biden in November for the Democrats if he shoves this one through. I mean, sure, you're going to get your AOC types, your Bernie Sanders types, but that's not where the country is. In fact, the reason Joe Biden got elected is because people thought he was in the middle. So if he fails to deliver on some of these basic things like keeping inflation in check, not spending taxpayer money on all these various programs, if he fails on that, I don't think his party is going to have the future he wants it to have. Thank you so much for listening. A quick reminder, do make sure that you subscribe to this podcast. I'll probably be back in the studio tomorrow, but it was kind of fun just talking to you from here today. Do make sure you subscribe, give it a like, a thumbs up, and share the video. That's super helpful for me. And make sure you download this on Apple iTunes, on Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. I'll see you right back here tomorrow.